This woman has no idea what the war will do to her life. We begin in 1957 with the widow of former American President Franklin Roosevelt, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, arriving in Russia, where she would meet Mr. Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. However, instead of going straight from the airport to meet the guy, she decides to make a stop first, wanting to talk to an old friend, and this of course displeases her escort, who explains that a lady shouldn't be late for an official engagement. In response, Eleanor replies that it was a gentleman's duty to wait for a lady, and she begins to tell more about her friend, Lyudmila Pavlichenko. Then we jump back in time to 1942, to a conference at the White House, where Eleanor is greeting some Chinese soldiers, and Krasavchenko, the head of the Soviet delegation, gets uncomfortable when she brings up the fact that he's a communist, and asks how many enemies he's taken out. And like a good politician, the guy says that wasn't his job, but rather his party colleagues. So Eleanor turns to a Soviet sniper named Vladimir, and he says he's taken out 152 enemies with 154 shots. This impresses the First Lady, but not as much as Lyudmila, a woman who carried 309 confirmed kills on her back, and she talks about it with an unusual calmness, referring to the enemy simply as fascists. And it's not just Eleanor who's impressed by this. The entire press goes into a frenzy, wanting to know more about the soldiers' achievements. So we go even further back in time, this time to 1937 at the Kiev State University. On the day Lyudmila outperforms her friends by being admitted to something in first place, and I say something because the movie doesn't make it clear what she was admitted to. It just shows how Lyudmila was an exemplary student. And because of this, Masha, one of her friends, who was also admitted in this mysterious competition, wants to go out and celebrate. But Lyudmila isn't very excited about going out and prefers to go home. There she seems more excited, asking to wear one of her mother's dresses as a celebration, and her request is accepted by her mom, who's an English teacher and is clearly very happy for her daughter. Her father, on the other hand, is a total deadbeat who never gave his daughter any attention, because what he really wanted was a son. The man is a police major who preferred hanging out with his buddies over being home with his family, so the guy doesn't even care about Lyudmila's achievement. Even so, she tries to talk to him, saying he could be proud of her, and then goes to the kitchen to help her mom. At that moment, the man says that passing was nothing more than his daughter's obligation, then gives her a dry congratulations and leaves, announcing he wouldn't be coming home that night. Lyudmila is anything but happy with his attitude, locking herself in her room, even as her mother calls for her. The next day, the young woman goes to the park to meet her friends, and while the girls want to go to the movies, the guys want to go to the shooting range. So they decide to settle it with a coin flip. Heads, they'd go to the shooting range, tails, they'd go to the movies. And of course it lands on heads, so off to the shooting range they go. At the range, the guys are all excited to show off for the girls, but Lyudmila decides to join in too, beating every single one of them by hitting closer to the center than anyone else. The next day, she's called to the dean's office, because her shot had impressed the instructor so much that the guy contacted the military, prompting them to recruit Lyudmila for a 6-month training program, after which she'd return to the university and finish her studies. The student even tries to turn down the offer, but the officer who made it tells her not to do that, and Lyudmila is practically forced to accept. At home, Lyudmila gets ready to leave for the training camp and spend 6 months away, while her mother tries to change her mind using her father's influence. But the young woman just refuses and leaves. Then Mrs. Pavlichenko confronts her husband about not doing anything, and the guy responds that in war, women are the ones who suffer the most, and a new war was on its way. So we jump back to 1942 in the United States, during a rally to raise funds to support the Soviet war effort, and the Americans didn't seem very excited about donating. The local press, for example, wanted a statement from Lyudmila, who had come to be known as Lady Death. Seeing this, Mrs. Eleanor takes the stage, trying to smooth things over, and she's accused of trying to get a head start on her husband's campaign. However, it's she who speaks about the real purpose of this meeting, which isn't just to raise money, but to get the Americans to open a second front, leaving the Nazis cornered. But sending American soldiers to fight on foreign soil was unacceptable to some people there, and it had also been a campaign promise made by President Roosevelt. And hearing all those accusations aimed at Mrs. Eleanor is too much for Lyudmila, who takes the microphone and responds in surprisingly good English, saying it's better to have a friend fighting by your side than a friend who just sends you weapons. Then her English becomes a target, and the press doubts that she's just a simple soldier, forcing Lyudmila to explain that her mother is an English teacher, and she also explains that she studied history first in Kiev and then in Odessa. And so we jump to Odessa in June 1941, where Masha is with Lyudmila in a library, and while our main character just wants to study, her friend is being pretty shallow, only thinking about the guys in uniform, and that's the only explanation for that mysterious admission. Lyudmila and her friend must have transferred to the University of Odessa. To give you an idea of how obsessed Lyudmila was with studying, studying, the librarian has to call in reinforcements from Sonia, who has a doctor brother, and plans to introduce him to the girl and get her to go to the beach. So the girls finally leave, heading to the summer hotspot for beachgoers, where they meet two pilots, Grisha and Nikolai. Masha is instantly smitten with Grisha, while the other pilot shows a lot of interest in Lyudmila, but she couldn't care less about him. It's also at the beach that she meets Boris, Sonia's doctor brother, who the girl had told to shave, wear his best cologne, iron his pants, and polish his shoes. All of that because he absolutely had to impress Lyudmila, since after seeing her in a swimsuit, he was determined to marry her as fast as humanly possible. That's when the pilots come back wearing their uniforms, and Nikolai hits on Lyudmila again, but that's not all he does. The guy is pretty hyped about the war that's about to start, while Boris isn't happy about it at all. The doctor even gets called a coward by the guy, for not having the guts to protect his family, his country, and his woman. Boris responds that no, he wouldn't protect anyone, but he'd save people with his medical skills. That shuts Nikolai up for a while, and Grisha steps in, talking about a flight training they'd be doing. Nikolai takes the chance to invite Lyudmila, but she turns him down. Masha, on the other hand, immediately accepts Grisha's invite, since she's totally crushing on him and doesn't even try to hide it. Sometime later, Lyudmila is at Boris's house having lunch, when the guy's parents start a full-on interrogation about her life, asking things like where she lives, if her family owns their home, how many kids Lyudmila plans to have, and so on. Then the couple talks up their son's qualities and makes the doctor show her an engagement ring, simple but valuable to them, all in an effort to push the guy on the girl. Lyudmila stays quiet the entire time. Next, the patriarch of the family tells a joke about Jewish people. At first, Lyudmila doesn't laugh, but she ends up smiling too. Right then, a neighbor barges into the house, sees everyone laughing, and gets annoyed, so she turns on the radio, revealing that the country has been attacked by the Nazis, leaving over 200 dead and wounded in the cities of Zhytomyr, Kiev, Sevastopol, and several others. And this woman just walks into other people's houses, then leaves like nothing happened, and she's still annoyed because people are laughing. They really give her a lot of freedom. Anyway, even knowing about the war, the patriarch insists that Boris take Lyudmila to the opera, and the worst part is she actually goes. However, she doesn't have the patience to stay there long, especially after they get scolded by a woman for talking too loud, and she leaves. Outside, Lyudmila tells him she's going to a shooting camp, then to the war, and Boris tries to talk her out of it, but she's already made up her mind, so she urges him to join the effort, but he refuses, saying his skills would be more useful right there. Clearly annoyed by his response, she realizes the doctor really is a coward after all, gives up on convincing him, and leaves, telling Boris to go back inside and finish watching his precious opera. In 1942, at the Soviet Union's embassy in the United States, Krasavchenko arrives with an invitation from Mrs. Roosevelt, inviting Lyudmila to stay at the White House, and he's annoyed because the invitation was only for her. Vladimir, for his part, sees it as an opportunity to place a spy right in the heart of America, and that convinces the guy to send her. As for Mrs. Roosevelt, she's curious about the feminine side of the soldier, and wants to understand how she killed 309 enemies in cold blood, especially since Lyudmila seemed quite bothered by being called Lady Death. At the training camp in 1941, Lyudmila is crawling through barbed wire when one of the officers spots Anya's underwear, and in his opinion, she was wearing undergarments inappropriate for the army. This prompts the guy to do a sweep of the women's belongings, finding several unnecessary items like high heels, dolls, and even a teddy bear. He's absolutely furious with these findings, because none of this stuff would help them win the war. The guy lines up both male and female soldiers, drawing laughs from the men, but that's not what he wanted, because soldiers are dying every day, and he gives them all a lecture too, ending by burning all the women's items that weren't in the army regulations. Then the training continues, and Lyudmila stands out, being the best in her class at spotting enemy positions, camouflaging, and shooting. There was even a time when the major stood right next to the target and made her shoot, telling her she was a sniper, not an artillery gunner, putting pressure on Lyudmila to hit the bullseye and not miss the shot. After she hits the target, the major goes to the command tent where his superior informs him that the male soldiers will have to go to war even with little training, and he says what a waste that is. Then the guy tells him about the soldier Lyudmila and her qualities, showing a great deal of respect for her, asking Captain Makarov to take the girl and keep her safe. Now, in Odessa in August 1941, we see the young woman on the battlefield, when Captain Makarov is teaching her how to take out an enemy officer if she spots one. He also teaches Lyudmila how to destroy a tank with 3 bullets by shooting through the vehicle's viewport and killing the driver, and for that, she requests anti-tank tank ammunition, which the captain provides. That's when an air raid begins, and many of their allies are wounded in the chaos that follows. Lyudmila herself has to crawl quickly to escape a cannon falling in her direction that threatened to crush her. When the attack passes, it's the German soldiers and tanks' turn to join the fight, firing shots at the woman, who digs up her weapon and hits the armored vehicle, just like Captain Makarov had taught her. However, she only lands one shot, and gets slightly dazed by a cannon blast, but she recovers, takes advantage of a fellow soldier's distraction as he charges toward the enemy, and lands a second shot, piercing the tank's armor and wounding the driver. The third bullet is Captain Makarov's doing, destroying the armored vehicle and killing its occupants. Meanwhile, Lyudmila spots an enemy officer in the distance, and initially chickens out, but after seeing a comrade get hit and fall, she takes out two men with a single shot, dropping the officer. After that, the battle is won, and Captain Makarov goes up to the young woman asking if Lyudmila is hurt, carrying a canteen full of hard liquor, and seeing the body of the fallen soldier who had motivated her. Sometime later, General Petrov of the 25th Division personally presents Lyudmila with a brand new rifle for her exceptional actions on the battlefield, and she promises to take out over 100 enemies with it. The general, however, is quite worried about Lyudmila, asking Captain Makarov to keep an eye on her, because if the girl is anything like her father, she'd be trouble. Later, the captain is helping Lyudmila customize her new weapon when he opens up about his past, revealing he was married once, even though he was afraid of getting married, and that fear proved justified at the start of the Finnish War, when his wife died because he couldn't save her. Right then, Masha shows up calling for Lyudmila, revealing she'd also joined the army, and for the first time Lyudmila shows some interest in Captain Makarov, telling her friend that one day he'd be hers. In 1942, the soldier is giving a press conference when a man stands up claiming to have fled Russia in 1928, accusing the citizens of the Soviet Union of fighting against their own people, bringing up the Finnish War, and arguing that they didn't deserve help from the United States. Those words put Lyudmila in hot water, and Mrs. Eleanor is forced to step in once again, teaching the soldier how to handle an interview, even though that kind of skill takes years of practice. Back in 1941, we see how Lyudmila had become a killing machine against the Nazis, as she arrives with two soldiers telling Captain Makarov how she'd taken out 3 more, and one of them she got the moment he lit a cigarette. The captain, for his part, tells her about the time he took out 3 with a single shot, but nobody believed him and he never got credit for it. The next day, Lyudmila heads out to yet another battle to defend her country, changing her position without being ordered to, so the captain goes after her. At that moment, the woman was trying to hit 3 enemies with 1 shot just like Captain Makarov had done, but she misses, alerting the Germans to her position and taking a bullet graze on her arm. Then Makarov arrives and takes her back, saying the woman would end up in a court-martial for this kind of reckless behavior. She gets annoyed because if it wasn't for his interference, Lyudmila would have had 73 confirmed kills. The captain then makes her go back to her post, and the woman once again shows her ruthless side by cruelly finishing off a wounded enemy soldier that Masha had just saved. This upsets Makarov, and he argues with Lyudmila again, losing his composure for a moment. At night, Lyudmila is tending to her wound when Grisha and Nikolai show up. While at Captain Makarov's tent, he's informed about a retreat order and doesn't understand it, but accepts. Then the guy goes to the medical tent where Lyudmila was, and when she's left alone with Nikolai, he attacks her, but she manages to fight him off right as the captain walks into the tent to help her. When she sees him, she tells him she doesn't always need his help, so the guy leaves and the soldier goes after him, grabbing him and giving him a kiss. But Captain Makarov turns her down, saying he'd made a promise to himself. The next day, Lyudmila is clearly annoyed about being rejected, but it's pretty obvious the captain has feelings for the soldier. She complains to another officer about it, hearing from him that the guy was afraid of her dying in battle, and his words practically jinx it, because right then a bomb explodes, burying Lyudmila and getting her rushed to the hospital. There she is treated by none other than Boris, and he's thrown off balance because Lyudmila wakes up saying she loves Makarov. The doctor also loves the woman, so the captain gets cocky, saying she'd be well taken care of there. However, the doctor fires back, saying everyone is well taken care of there, and the captain keeps provoking him, saying she'd choose between the two of them once she got out of bed. And honestly, this is so unnecessary. Her choice is already made. Boris is just a lovesick puppy here, and she's already chosen Captain Makarov. That much is pretty clear. Lyudmila tried to kiss him, and woke up saying she loves him. He's the one who turned her down. But even knowing all of that, the guy still went to mess with the doctor. Pretty annoying of him in my opinion. Anyway, after going to mess with the doctor, he gets a jab from Boris, telling the captain to take better care of Lyudmila so this doesn't happen again, and the doctor leaves, making the guy think. Then we jump to September 1942, when Lyudmila is helping Mrs. Eleanor in the kitchen, and the old woman drops a frying pan on the floor, making Lyudmila remember her her war days and reawakening old fears. In the fall of 1941, she was on a ship heading to the city of Sevastopol, where an evacuation would take place, when Boris tries to get her to eat some soup, and several enemy planes appear attacking the Soviet ships. In the middle of this chaos, she has to go back to combat, but Boris won't let her because of her health condition. So around November, she decides to appeal to General Petrov, and he was on his way to a meeting with other commanders, where the head of the Navy ordered all ships to move to the Caucasus region, fearing they'd be destroyed, even though just one of them would be capable of suppressing all the enemy's firepower. And then General Petrov brings up how sailors are getting killed due to the incompetence of their leaders, who don't force them to camouflage and crawl like army soldiers do. And to prove his point, he calls Lyudmila in, asking who her target would be, him in the camouflaged uniform or the other general in the black uniform. After Lyudmila answers it would be the one in the black uniform, the general gives in, making a request for the uniform change. She's then dismissed by Petrov, but he doesn't fully clear her, just says the woman could go back to fighting once the doctors gave her the green light. So she goes to Boris, but he doesn't clear her right away. It's only after she finds Anya carrying Captain Makarov's rifle, which the officer wanted Lyudmila to have, that the doctor finally clears her for combat, and for that he gets a kiss. Lyudmila gives the lovesick puppy a kiss on the mouth as a thank you before we jump to the White House in 1942, when Mrs. Eleanor gives Lyudmila a dress as a gift, wanting people to see the woman behind all the suffering and war. In return, the young woman gives the First Lady her military uniform cap. Then Mrs. Eleanor shares a little about how she met her husband. She described herself as a tall woman, not at all pretty or attractive, and she couldn't understand what a handsome and successful man had seen in her. This makes Lyudmila remember November 1941 in Sevastopol, when Masha shows her friend 2 sweaters she'd managed to get for them to fight the cold. She also mentions that Nikolai was killed in combat, asking if Lyudmila has seen her new officer and if he's good looking. That's when Captain Leonid Kitsenko arrives, introducing himself and taking the young woman out to take out some Germans by sabotaging them behind enemy lines. However, Lyudmila shows her ruthless side to this officer too, shooting a soldier and letting him suffer before finishing him off. So the girl also gets a lecture from Captain Leonid, who says that war is also a way of life, and that Lyudmila should think about something worth living for, because he didn't want to lose another partner. Then he walks away, leaving her deep in thought, and so the two of them keep completing various missions, taking out German enemies behind the lines, and growing closer and closer to each other. At a New Year's celebration party in 1942, a little girl gives a passionate speech about killing Germans, and at this party, the lovesick Boris shows up once again hovering around Lyudmila, but he doesn't get anywhere. On the contrary, it's Captain Leonid who makes a move, after some soldiers insult the young woman, and he gets into a fight to defend her. In this fight, he ends up with a bloody lip, and without even wiping it off, he and Lyudmila end up kissing and having a good time together. In Chicago in September 1942, we see just how famous Lyudmila has become, when a man tries to recruit her to be the face of a cigarette brand, and to get rid of the guy, she says that Krasavchenko is her agent. Then the famous country singer of the time, Woody Guthrie, calls her to his dressing room, where he reveals he's written a song for her called Miss Pavlichenko. This makes her remember her days at war, and all the times she fought alongside her beloved to free Sevastopol from the enemy's presence, then returned to a village on the outskirts of the city. There was even a time when they used a decoy to trick an enemy sniper and take him out. There she would always meet up with Masha, and one day the woman invited the couple to her wedding with Grisha. However, the pilot was killed in combat, and what was supposed to be a wedding turned into a funeral. Seeing the state her friend was in, Lyudmila decides she wants to have a child with Captain Leonid, but he's not at all excited about the idea, and she reminds him of his own words about war being a way of life. Back in Chicago in 42, the head of the delegation makes Lyudmila put on that military uniform, revealing several scars on her back that leave Mrs. Roosevelt horrified. So we jump back a few months in time to see that Lyudmila got those scars in a minefield, where she and Captain Leonid met a tragic end, because there yet another one of Lyudmila's loved ones lost his life. By this point, the young woman had become a symbol of the Soviet cause, but the enemy now believed she was dead, and the officers couldn't allow that. So even wounded and clearly in pain, Lyudmila poses for some photos to prove she's still alive. Back at the village, the young woman is so devastated by the war and all the losses she's endured throughout her journey that while training to return to combat by shooting at the mannequin in a military uniform, a girl with chickenpox appears and Lyudmila nearly shoots her, thinking she's an enemy. And in this case, I have to defend Lyudmila. She was shooting, and the girl just walks right in front of her. She was basically asking to get hit. Lucky for her that Lyudmila is really good and managed to redirect the shot seconds before. Now, you could argue about whether that was the best place to practice shooting and all that, but even so, that little girl was extremely reckless. But getting back to the movie, the photos taken to prove Lyudmila was alive actually worked. worked, and the Germans sent one of their best snipers to take her out. His name is Otto von Singer. Initially, the young woman refuses to face him, but the army commissar reminds her that the guy will kill many of them, so she doesn't have to do this just for herself, motivating Lyudmila to go back to the battlefield. So the young woman camouflages herself in the vegetation like she always does, waiting for an opportunity to shoot the guy, spending a night where she gazes up at the stars. And by morning, she notices her back is bleeding, so she decides to smear the blood on her forehead and expose her torso to the enemy in hopes that he'd reveal his position. She ends up taking a bullet in the arm, while Otto with his little mustache gets taken out. After that, the young woman walks up to her rival's body, noticing he had a little Hitler mustache, and looking at photos of the guy, she discovers he was married, so she closes the enemy's eyes, showing mercy for the very first time. As for Boris, he goes to General Petrov and manages to get Lyudmila an evacuation from Sevastopol, arguing that Lyudmila is a woman and has done more than enough for the army. Then as he's evacuating her, Lyudmila pauses for a moment, remembering the day at the beach, a happy time for her when she could have had a future with the doctor and many children. So the guy manages to get Lyudmila out of Sevastopol, but stays behind, revealing that he was a Jewish man from Odessa. And we see that along with the young woman, he sent the ring he'd planned to use to propose to her. We then find out that the defense of the city lasted 250 days, and 2 more submarines besides that one left the city carrying important people and documents. In the United States, Lyudmila tosses away the speech written by Krasavchenko and decides to remind everyone that she's only 25 years old, and yet carries all that weight on her shoulders. The whole audience applauds her, including the members of the press. Then we find out that after the war, Lyudmila returned to the university and graduated. She was even awarded the highest distinction of all, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. And we close by seeing Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt in 1957 sitting next to Lyudmila and her son watching the opera. And did you notice how the movie barely talks about the actual Battle of Sevastopol? Practically not at all. It's really focused on Lyudmila's life. I think that's why the movie has a second title, The Female Sniper. But even that's inaccurate, since Lyudmila was Ukrainian. So what would you do in Lyudmila's place? Let me know in the comments.